It started with the sound of unfamiliar footsteps in the driveway, the shuffle of heels that did not belong to anyone in the household. The neighborhood, Oak Ridge Estates, had always been meticulously maintained, a place where freshly painted shutters matched the WA-approved color palette, where lawns were trimmed to regulation height, and where every car had its assigned place, the driveway, the curb in front of one's own home, or in the rarely used guest parking near the clubhouse. The garage, however, was sacrosanct. Private property, personal space, a boundary clearly defined in both the bylaws and common sense. Yet that morning, as the homeowner walked to the kitchen for their usual coffee, they glanced out the window and saw it. A dusty beige crossover SUV, with a peeling, "Support the WA" bumper sticker, sitting smugly inside their two-car garage. It was parked crookedly, occupying the space as though it had every right to be there, blocking access to the storage shelves at the side and even partially scraping against the paint of the garage wall. There was no note, no explanation, just intrusion. The first assumption was that it must have been a mistake. Perhaps a delivery driver, or a neighbor's guest who misunderstood the layout of the cul-de-sac. But as the hours passed and no one came to retrieve it, the truth began to creep in: this was deliberate. The vehicle belonged to none other than Karen Miller, the self-appointed watchdog of the Oak Ridge Estates WA, a woman infamous for her hawk-eyed patrols, her fondness for rule enforcement when it suited her, and her selective blindness when it did not. Karen lived 2 houses down, in a perfectly bland beige home that matched her SUV, with a perfectly bland hedgerow she claimed was heritage shrubbery. Her mother, Dolores, had recently moved in with her, after a hip surgery made it inconvenient to manage her own property. Together, they had become something of a duo, one issuing passive-aggressive notes, the other spreading gossip thinly veiled as concerned community updates. The garage door had been closed overnight, as it always was, and the lock had shown no sign of tampering. That left only one explanation. Karen, being a member of the HOA board, had access to the emergency override code for neighborhood garages, a code intended for use only in the most extreme emergencies, such as fire, flooding, or medical crises. It was not, under any interpretation, intended for casual or personal convenience. By mid-afternoon, the beige SUV remained unmoved. The homeowner, still cautious, decided to document the situation with photographs, the vehicle's position, the license plate, the time stamps. The WA bylaws were clear about unauthorized use of property. A violation report was filed through the official portal, with all necessary attachments. It was a system designed to protect residents, though in Oak Ridge Estates, that system often felt more like a ceremonial gesture than an actual enforcement mechanism. The following morning, the car was gone, as though it had never been there. The garage floor bore only faint tire marks and a slight scuff of beige paint against the wall. No note of apology, no explanation, no knock at the door. Just absence. It would have been easy to leave it at that, to chalk it up as an isolated incident and move on. But 3 days later, it happened again. This time, there were 2 cars. The same beige SUV, and a battered maroon sedan that could only belong to Dolores. They were crammed side by side, the sedan awkwardly nosed into a corner, the SUV once again taking up the majority of the space. The homeowner's own vehicle had been left on the driveway overnight due to some reorganizing of storage, and it now sat exposed, collecting dew and pine needles while their rightful space was usurped. It became clear then, this was not a mistake. This was entitlement. The HOA's golden girl and her visiting mother had decided that the homeowner's garage was a convenient overflow lot for their own purposes. Perhaps they believed no one would challenge them. After all, Karen wielded influence in the HOA. She controlled meeting agendas, fine issuances, and even landscaping approvals. Few in the neighborhood dared cross her. But this was a line too far. The homeowner filed a second violation report, this time including the photos from both incidents and a copy of the HOA bylaws highlighting unauthorized use of property. They even printed a copy for their own records, sliding it into a folder labeled, WA, Karen, in case this ever escalated further. That evening, an email arrived, not from the WA board at large, but from Karen herself. It was curt and dismissive, claiming the garage was communal space during neighborhood maintenance periods, and that temporary use by board members was within reason. There was no such clause in the bylaws, of course. It was a fabrication, one meant to intimidate or confuse. The homeowner ignored the email, responding instead to the entire WA board with a request for official clarification. Days passed with no word from the board. Meanwhile, The parking continued. Sometimes it was only Karen's SUV. Other times, Dolores joined in, often leaving crumbs and discarded tissues behind, as though the garage were their personal waiting room. The homeowner began to feel invaded in their own home, their morning routine disrupted by the sight of foreign vehicles where their own should be. The neighbors whispered but said little aloud. Some shrugged, saying it wasn't worth the fight. Others, quieter but sharper, hinted at their own run-ins with Karen over things like fence heights or holiday decorations. One even confided that Karen had once tried to fine them for inappropriate mailbox decor during Halloween. The tension grew, subtle but constant, like a low hum under the surface of daily life. The garage, once a place of order and routine, became a battleground. Every evening, the homeowner checked the security footage. Every morning, they peered out the window before stepping into the driveway. The sense of invasion was no longer just about the cars, it was about the message they sent: your space is not yours. Your rules are not ours. And then came the letter. A printed notice, slipped into the mailbox without a stamp, bearing the HOA's official letterhead. It declared that, effective immediately, select members of the HOA board and their immediate family were permitted to use resident garages, in the interest of community accommodation during the upcoming neighborhood renovations. No details on the renovations were provided. No vote had been taken. It was, in every way, an abuse of power disguised as policy. This was no longer a matter of nuisance parking. It was the beginning of something larger, something that threatened the very principle of ownership in Oak Ridge Estates. The homeowner folded the letter, placed it alongside the photographs and emails, and stared at the growing folder on their desk. It was no longer a question of whether to act, but how. Because one thing was now certain: Karen and her mother were not going to stop. And neither, now, was the homeowner. The letter changed everything. It was no longer a matter of an annoying neighbor overstepping her bounds. It had become a matter of power, and of who would yield it in Oak Ridge Estates. The homeowner, once cautious and patient, now found themselves caught in the undertow of an HOA scheme orchestrated by a woman who had mastered the art of subtle bullying. Karen, with her self-appointed authority and her mother in tow, had escalated a petty invasion into a precedent-setting maneuver. If left unchallenged, this would not only normalize her behavior but embolden her further. The days following the letter were a tense blur of surveillance and strategy. The homeowner documented each new violation with precision: photos, timestamps, and written accounts. The folder thickened. Emails to the HOA board went unanswered, or worse, were acknowledged with vague, canned responses that suggested compliance rather than confrontation. It became increasingly clear that Karen was leveraging her position on the board to manipulate the narrative. What was once a quiet community dispute was slowly morphing into a one-sided policy, enforced not by consensus but by her influence. Meanwhile, the garage continued to serve as Karen and Dolores's personal annex. The beige SUV came and went without ceremony, often leaving streaks of dirt on the floor from its undercarriage. Dolores's maroon sedan lingered longer, sometimes overnight, its leaky engine leaving oil spots that marred the once clean concrete. The homeowner scrubbed them away, each swipe of the brush feeding a growing sense of indignation. The garage was theirs, their property, their right to use or leave empty. And yet, every incursion felt like a theft. It was during one of these cleaning sessions that the homeowner noticed something unsettling. The security camera feed, which had always been a reliable silent witness, showed gaps. Small, seemingly random segments of missing footage during the nights when the cars appeared. It was as if someone had tampered with the system, not erasing entire days, but trimming just enough to muddy the timeline. The realization hit hard. Karen, or someone with her influence, had access not only to the garage code but potentially to the security infrastructure as well. The level of intrusion was deeper than imagined. Rather than lash out blindly, the homeowner decided to adapt. They upgraded their security quietly, installing a hidden, battery-operated camera inside the garage itself, one Karen and her mother would not expect. They also reached out discreetly to other residents, starting with those who had hinted at their own grievances. One by one, small stories trickled in: unauthorized fines, arbitrary landscaping rejections, mysterious, policy updates, that seemed to favor Karen's side of the street. A pattern emerged, and it was ugly. The final straw came on a humid Wednesday evening, when the homeowner returned from work to find both cars once again lodged in their garage, and this time, blocking access to their own vehicle, which had been parked properly in the driveway. A handwritten note sat on the hood, penned in Dolores's shaky script: declaring that their use of the space was temporary and necessary for community progress, and that residents should be more neighborly during transitional periods. No signature, no contact information, just presumption. The trap was set that night. The hidden camera rolled as usual, and the homeowner did not touch the cars, nor move the note. They called the non-emergency police line, not to start a war, but to ask for guidance. The officer, polite but firm, confirmed what the homeowner already knew: the garage was private property, and any unauthorized parking could constitute trespassing. With that confirmation in hand, they documented everything, timestamped it, and waited. Karen arrived the next morning, as predictable as sunrise, to retrieve her SUV. Dolores followed shortly after in her sedan, her gait slow and deliberate as she shuffled into the passenger seat. The camera caught it all: their smug glances, their casual disregard for the property they were invading, and their departure without acknowledgement. The homeowner did not confront them, not yet. Instead, they compiled the footage into a concise, indisputable package and sent it not only to the HOA board but also to the city's community compliance office. This was no longer a petty squabble, it had become a matter of legal standing. The response from the HOA board was delayed but telling. An emergency meeting was announced, allegedly to review new parking policies and address resident concerns. Whispers spread quickly through Oak Ridge Estates. Neighbors, once cowed by Karen's influence, began to murmur openly. Some even approached the homeowner in person, offering quiet thanks for standing up to what many had endured in silence. Karen, of course, did not relent. She doubled down instead, plastering the neighborhood bulletin board with notices about temporary parking flexibility and community-wide cooperation during renovations that no one had seen a trace of beyond her own assertions. Her mother, Dolores, became a fixture in the neighborhood, stationed on porches or by the community mailbox, spinning tales of how selfish residents were obstructing progress. But cracks began to form. One neighbor, tired of the charade, leaked a copy of the original HOA bylaws to the group chat that had sprung up among the discontented. Nowhere in its pages was there any provision allowing board members to commandeer private garages. Another neighbor revealed that the so-called renovation funds mentioned in Karen's notices had never been approved in any official meeting. The narrative Karen had built was unraveling, thread by thread. The homeowner remained patient. They did not rise to the bait when Karen left another email, this one threatening fines for failure to accommodate community needs. They did not respond when Dolores left passive-aggressive notes under their doormat. Instead, they prepared for the HOA meeting, the one that would either cement Karen's fabricated authority or expose it for the fraud it was. As the day of the meeting approached, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Cars slowed in front of the homeowner's house, lingering as if to catch a glimpse of the infamous garage. Conversations hushed when Karen walked by, her usual air of superiority now tinged with defensiveness. Even Dolores seemed less sure of herself, though she still made her rounds, cane tapping against the pavement. The homeowner gathered their evidence, photos, videos, official correspondence, and the police statement confirming their property rights. They were no longer alone in this. A quiet coalition of neighbors had formed, ready to speak if called upon. For the first time since the ordeal began, the balance of power felt as though it might shift. And so, the stage was set, a battle not just over a garage, but over the principles of ownership, privacy, and accountability in a community that had long operated under the shadow of one woman's control. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived with a tension that felt almost tangible. The clubhouse, usually a sleepy venue for monthly announcements about lawn care and community bake sales, buzzed with quiet unrest. Folding chairs were arranged in stiff rows, the smell of old carpet and stale coffee lingering in the air. Neighbors filled the space slowly, cautiously, their glances darting toward the front of the room where Karen sat, posture stiff, hands folded over a manila folder that looked suspiciously thin compared to the hefty file clutched by the homeowner. Karen's mother, Dolores, was present too, stationed at her daughter's side like a frail yet determined sentinel. Her maroon sedan, notorious for its oil stains, was parked just outside, occupying a spot labeled, board only. The beige SUV, as always, was in the best lit space, a small emblem of the entitlement that had brought everyone here. The meeting began with the usual formalities, a roll call of board members and an agenda that conspicuously buried the garage concerns under miscellaneous community matters. But the room was not in the mood for ceremony. Whispers stirred as the homeowner rose, folder in hand, and moved to the podium when the floor was opened for resident grievances. The moment had arrived. What followed was not a dramatic outburst, but a methodical unraveling. The homeowner presented each piece of evidence with measured precision: the photographs of the unauthorized vehicles, the emails filled with fabricated policies, the printed letter that bore the wall letterhead without proper authorization, and finally, the security footage, grainy but undeniable, showing Karen and Dolores repeatedly accessing a garage that was not theirs. The hidden camera angle, especially, elicited murmurs from the crowd. Its footage had caught them not only parking but rifling through the homeowner's shelves at one point, apparently in search of a spare folding chair they later returned. Karen's composure began to crack as the evidence mounted. Her cheeks flushed a blotchy red, her mouth tightened into a thin line, and her once steely eyes flickered toward the other board members for backup that did not come. Dolores, for her part, shifted uncomfortably, her cane tapping the linoleum floor in uneven beats. The turning point came when the homeowner produced the statement from the Community Compliance Office, a formal acknowledgement that the garage was private property and that the board had no authority to repurpose it without the owner's consent. It was a direct contradiction to every claim Karen had made, and it hung in the air like a gavel already swung. One by one, the neighbors began to speak. Some shared their own minor grievances that now seemed part of a larger pattern: arbitrary fines, rejected paint color approvals, unexplained fees. Others simply voiced their support for restoring transparency and fairness to the HOA. The quiet coalition that had formed in recent weeks now revealed itself fully, and its weight was considerable. Karen attempted a defense, citing emergency community protocols and informal agreements that no one else recalled ever signing. Her voice, once authoritative, now wavered as questions came, not just from the residents, but from her own fellow board members. Where were the renovation plans she had mentioned? Where was the record of any vote authorizing the use of private garages? Why had the bylaws not been amended, if this was truly policy? Each question met with hesitation only further eroded her standing. By the time the discussion drew to a close, the board had no choice but to act. A motion was made, first to rescind the so-called temporary parking flexibility, and then, more forcefully, to remove Karen from her position as head of the HOA board pending a formal review of her conduct. It passed with a majority that left no room for argument. Dolores, indignant, muttered under her breath but offered no formal protest. Her influence, always derivative of her daughter's, crumbled alongside it. In the days that followed, the neighborhood underwent a quiet transformation. The unauthorized cars disappeared from the homeowner's garage for good, the oil stains cleaned and resealed as part of a gesture funded by the very HOA that had once enabled the abuse. Karen retreated from public view, her SUV now parked firmly in her own driveway, stripped of its smug authority. Dolores was seen less frequently, her errands limited to short walks with her cane rather than daily rounds of unsolicited oversight. The homeowner, though vindicated, did not bask in triumph. Their goal had never been to humiliate, only to reclaim what was theirs and ensure no one else in the community would endure the same. The folder labeled HOA Karen was closed and stored away, its contents now a record rather than a weapon. The HOA board, shaken but restructured, implemented new policies to prevent such overreach in the future. Garage access codes were changed and redistributed securely. Emergency overrides were restricted to verified crises with documented authorization. Transparency became more than a buzzword, it became a necessity born of hard-learned lessons. And yet, the story lingered in Oak Ridge Estates, passed along in whispered retellings during block parties and over fences. Karen's name became shorthand for unchecked entitlement, a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting petty authority go unchallenged. The garage, once a symbol of invasion, returned to its quiet role as a place for tools, storage bins, and a car parked neatly where it belonged. For the homeowner, the ordeal brought an unexpected outcome, a closer bond with their neighbors, many of whom had stood with them when it counted. What began as an isolated act of audacity had exposed a culture of intimidation and turned it on its head. The cul-de-sac felt different now, not perfect, never perfect, but freer. Months later, a small note appeared in the homeowner's mailbox. No signature, just a short apology, awkwardly phrased and written in a hand that wavered with age. Dolores, it seemed, had at least come to understand the harm caused. Whether Karen shared that realization remained uncertain. She had withdrawn from most community interactions, her reign of petty power reduced to a memory. In the end, the lesson was simple and quietly profound. Property lines exist for a reason, and respect, once lost, is not easily regained. The garage was no longer just a storage space, it was a reminder that even in the manicured world of HOAs, one person's patience and persistence could tip the balance against arrogance disguised as authority. And so, the chapter closed, not with fanfare, but with a restored sense of boundary and the knowledge that in Oak Ridge Estates, at least for now, the rules once again served everyone, not just the few who believed themselves above them.